Morning, everyone. So we're going to discuss Pringles, Evgeny Prigozhin, and the special landing operation. That's not mine. That was I forget who the original source of that is, but it seemed appropriate. Now there are an awful lot of things that could be discussed here. Um, I'll limit it to two because what I want to do actually is to discuss why this is important for the Labour Party, which seems like an obscure link, but actually it's really important that the Labour leadership, who I'm sure won't say a great deal about this, behind the scenes needs to be taking this very seriously. And I want to explain for those who may have focused on the Wagner group, the paramilitary group that had been paid for by Russia, and now that Russia has admitted that it paid for it, that they were funding them, given that they were a terrorist organization, the Russian state basically admitted that it is a state sponsor of terrorism. So, because people are asking about things like, well, I mean, it was inevitable, by the way. As soon as Pringles, Prigozhin, I call him Pringles, as soon as Pringles had humiliated Putin, that was it. His days were numbered. Every expert on the matter said, well, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time. There was some saying he won't be in a rush to do it, but it's just a matter of time. And there it was. It wasn't out of a window. It wasn't with radioactive tea. It was like, it wasn't even a plane crash. It was a plane shot out of the sky, let's be honest. But why does it matter? It matters not because of Wagner's activities in Ukraine. That is arguably what triggered the coup. But it's their activities in the Sahel. Now, for those who don't know what that is, there's a region in Africa. Basically, it's where all the political instability is, or much of it. There's a region in Africa. It's like sort of between the Sahara and the Sudan. It's at the bottom part of the south of the Sahara. And there's a whole belt of countries. And if you look at the news for any one of these countries, massive political turmoil. There are people that are indiscriminate. I mean, the words that are usually used in news reports about it is like indiscriminate killings, tortures, and so on, as if there's no purpose to it. So you can understand unstable countries where various warlords vie for power in a very feudal society. But there, you can understand what the violence is about. It's about seizing power. Whereas in a lot of these countries in the Sahel, it's not about seizing power. There's like no rhyme or reason for the acts of violence. There is, because it's orchestrated by Russia. And it was their instrument was the Wagner group. And you think to yourself, so how was it in Russia's interest to have a paramilitary group that they are heavily financing, creating all of this political instability in what is effectively the middle of Africa, right? And creating a lot of displacement, creating lots of refugees. It's because Putin noticed some years ago that Europe has a bit of a problem when it comes to taking in asylum seekers. The focus has very much been, particularly for me, on our British government, who have a very, not only inhumane, but impractical attitude towards asylum. We're spending a lot of money on a crap system that makes the problem worse instead of just dealing with it properly, right? But it's an issue all across Europe. There's anti-immigration sentiment in every country in Europe. So when a country, say Germany, takes in like 1 million refugees pretty much at once a few years ago, even though the government weren't an anti-immigrant government, in parts of the country, so an influx like that is going to stoke those fears. So Putin had identified that if you can drive lots of refugees towards Europe, it sort of creates instability, because then there's arguments within the EU. Remember, Putin's invasion of Ukraine had nothing to do with NATO, had nothing to do with it had entirely to do with the fact that Ukraine had decided that it wanted to move in the EU's direction and not stay under the sheltering wing of Mother Russia. So it's very much about creating instability with the EU. In the EU, there's arguments about which countries should take how many refugees and so on. it is a source of disharmony within the EU, and therefore a source of disharmony within the European leadership. And Europe, of course, is the ideological opponent to Putin's Russia. So with Wagner finished now, Wagner's over, that's it. People, you know, if you think sort of, well, won't there just be a new head of it? The thing is, it's not just that Prigozhin was the head, the military head of Wagner, wasn't the founder, but the military head of it. He was it. You know, he's the one who built up all the links. You can't just, Putin can't just he can put someone else in charge of those troops and say, you are now the head of Wagner, get someone loyal, you are now the head of Wagner. But the troops won't necessarily do what they say. But also, more important than that, the links he'd created with all the various warlords who were orchestrating these acts of violence that were so useful to Putin. Prigozhin was that link. He was the one who built up that network. That network's now gone. So, and you've also got another problem, I suppose. This is me speculating rather than referring to experts here. Bear in mind, I'm not an expert on this. I'm only passing on what experts have said and makes sense to me. I doubt Putin would, even if he thinks someone was loyal, because he thought Prigozhin was loyal. Prigozhin made him his food, for goodness sake. So he thought Prigozhin was loyal, and he was wrong. So he may worry, can he really afford to create another large, well-financed, well-resourced paramilitary organization under someone else's leadership? You know, it's one of those things. It may well be that Putin decides it's not worth the hassle. So then the issue, and this is where Labour come into it, the issue then is what happens in the Sahel. Without Wagner, what happens? Does someone else take control? Do they try to resurrect Wagner? Do they try to get another group to do it? What happens? Does someone else fill the void or not? What's going to happen to the region? And this is important because a refugee crisis is important, and there's always a refugee crisis from this region in Africa because of this. You know, if we wanted to deal with it properly, it's not just that we should have a proper asylum system. We should actually tackle these paramilitary groups in Africa. We should help foster stability. But Labour will absolutely need to be thinking about this because they're going to have to deal with it. If Labour are thinking to themselves from next year they want to be in power for 10, 15, 20 years, they're going to have to deal with the inevitable refugee crisis that is going to emerge. But anyway, right, let's go through some comments because I strongly suspect that is not the main point that people have. So Starmer has to avoid travel by plane. Only over Russia. It was by all accounts, I mean, it's one of these things where, you know, the full details won't come out for some time because there's lots of denials and silence and so on. But in reality, what seems to have happened is Russian air. So Prigozhin and some mates, some senior members of Wagner, were flying from somewhere in Africa, I believe. I can't remember where, to Russia, and Russian air defense just shot them down. And it's not even like, I don't think it was even like a bomb in the luggage. I think it was just shot down. It's like, you know, Russian air defense just went, oh, Pringles played, shoot it. We're saying, I don't think he's dead, just like I don't think he actually tried to take over Moscow. He retreated from Ukraine before a counteroffensive, now faked his own death. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories. Certainly until there's international verification of like a body, okay, it's a possibility. You could argue that that would suit Putin as well. But the thing is, if Putin could be sure that he would actually melt away, the thing is, where that sort of conspiracy theory, because that is a conspiracy theory, goes wrong, is Putin wouldn't trust him. You know, we do not know for what, well, we do know for what reason Prigozhin stopped that coup, because he's an idiot. Like, again, I said this at the start, and this is not from me, this is from literally every expert. Ever since the major assault on Ukraine, I've been following people, and the people that have been consistently right, all of them are saying the same thing. Prigozhin is an idiot. That is why he started the coup when he wasn't prepared to go through with it. He's an idiot. Putin is a mob boss. That is how everyone describes him. There's no strategy. People think, oh, he must be a world leader that managed to hold on to this power. He must have some strategy. There was no strategy. He's a mob boss, right? What Putin has done here, because he had Prigozhin in a box now. He had him under control. There was no way another coup could start because Wagner were entirely financed by the Kremlin. All they had to do was turn off that money, stop giving them the sort of weapons that would allow them to launch an invasion against their own country. That's all he had to do. Easy. And yet he killed him because Prigozhin humiliated Putin. Putin is a mob boss. He has to make it clear that if anyone challenges him, there will... If Prigozhin had been allowed to live, then it's almost like you can get away. Prigozhin actually had him beaten. If he'd have pressed that attack, if he'd have pressed the coup, he would have taken over Russia. It's really that simple. That would have been worse, by the way, because he's a worse monster than Putin. And also a dumber one. But as far as Putin's concerned, he cannot allow people to think you can do it, fail, and still live to see another day. It's like, no. You will die. You will die. That is his attitude. He cannot afford to let people think that they can challenge him. They anyone that's thinking of challenging has to be aware that if they fail, they will die. Phil saying that problem is that area of Africa is going to become unlivable due to climate change and regard migration. Yes, that is why, regardless of anything else, there's going to be a huge level of, there's going to be a huge refugee crisis from there inside the next generation, potentially within the next 10 years. Absolutely, yes. That sort of area of South Sahara, climate change is ravaging it as well. But the key point was that's in the middle of Africa. What Wagner were doing were making sure that refugees from the area were being funneled towards Europe, specifically to destabilize Europe, right? In theory, we know that this migrant crisis is coming. We know this refugee crisis is coming. Really, what we ought to be doing is to stabilize political and stable parts of Africa, which is easier said than done, but that's what needs to happen. Because at the moment, the countries paying most attention to Africa are China and Russia, who do not necessarily have political stability in Europe at heart, right? So, and they're not worried about a refugee crisis. China's too far away, and Russia will just shoot them at the border. It's, or take them in if they want and put them to work on in labour camps, whatever. It's Europe that needs to pay attention to this. It's Europe that needs to make sure that when this huge refugee exodus occurs, and it will occur inside the next generation because of climate change, as Phil says, other Phil, the rest of Africa, as well as everyone can take their share. But anyway, Pringle might turn up in Vegas with Elvis. Yeah. Now, in all honesty, the idea of Putin going along with you could argue, as I say, you could argue that if he could trust Prigozhin to actually just melt away, with his box of disguises, then yeah, that would work for him, because as far as the world's concerned, he's dead. As far as the world is concerned, he's dead. Putin has re-established the fact that if you cross him, you die. But would he trust him? How would he trust him? Because then he looks ridiculous if Prigozhin, emerges later. And the fact that he is now an enemy of his. Now, Putin wouldn't have allowed him to live. There's no reason for him to allow him to live at all. If you're going to take on the likes of Putin, you have to finish it. That was Prigozhin's folly. I mean, I really don't know what he was expecting. I don't know why he stopped. I can believe that he genuinely didn't want to spill Russian blood. I can absolutely believe that. I can absolutely 100% believe that. That maybe he thought it would be a completely bloodless coup, and then when he found out that when it comes to taking Moscow, he would have had a fight, maybe that stopped him. But at the point at which he agreed to stop the coup, he should have known that he was going to die. It was really, a battle to the death. Either at that point, at the point at which he started that coup, either he had to die or Putin had to die. One of them had to die. And as soon as he stopped the coup, it had to be him, because he would then have no power to kill Putin. Likely Prigozhin is dead, although a second plane managed to land, and the number of bodies found the plane shot down was 8 so far, less than the manifest 10. Could have been easily a couple of others that weren't on it, or it could just be, that weren't found as yet. But there will be all sorts of like, what ifs coming out of this, of course, because we know that we're not realistically going to get a proper investigation for some time, if ever. But yeah, it was very much, as I say, it makes no sense for Putin to collude in any sort of conspiracy that allows it to appear that Prigozhin's dead, but he's not, because that's like doing him a favor. Why would Putin do him a favor? He doesn't know. He doesn't do anyone favors. He's only interested in himself. Why would he do so? Particularly, why would he do someone a favor who is an enemy of his now? Will the refugee crisis in Africa include us getting refugees that we previously sent to Rwanda? Well, we haven't sent anyone to Rwanda, so no. Manal saying, I always take the view of what's more likely. Yeah, but in this case, it's what you think is more likely. Prigozhin faked his death via air defense, or that either Putin or Shoigu saw a chance. The thing is, he was shot down by Russian air defense. Prigozhin doesn't control that. He has no links with the regular army, really. So, no, it will be what it is. There's a suggestion that 5,000 plus Wagner troops in Belarus are not happy bunnies. Could there be some rebellion? They're not happy now. Could there be some rebellion? They're not organised enough to. They're just a load of people now. Some of them have already been leaving, I think. It is interesting to note what is going to happen to the Wagner troops, because there's like, spread out across everywhere. There's like 25,000 of them or something, isn't there? So that is an interesting question. What happens to them? They're the only vaguely trained troops Russia really has outside of Russia at the moment. So what happens to that? What happens to the ones in Ukraine? What happens to the ones in Belarus? What happens to the ones around the Sahel, for example? That's the interesting question. Is there anyone loyal to Putin that he can put in charge of them, and that person will be able to lead them? Who knows? No idea. David Faulkner, thank you very much. The 38 Hong Kong dollar super chat. Poetic justice. He died in the same way that military pilots died on the way to Moscow. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I didn't want him dead. I would have rather he faced justice. The man's a monster. But at the same time, you also don't have any sympathy. You do have sympathy potentially for some on board. Remember, there were 2 or 3 pilots who will have just been pilots. As far as we can tell, as far as I know, perfectly innocent pilots who've lost their lives, and their families have lost them now as well. Boris would know what's going on. He could just ask his boss. Yeah, I don't think they'll tell him, though. I think the deal with Boris Johnson and the Russian oligarchs is they got him drunk and he told them what they wanted to know, and they didn't tell him anything that he might want to know. I wonder if this will mean that the Wagnerites in Belarus will try to invade Poland and start an entire Bugli via Article 5. No. You do get these sort of stories, though, don't you? You get these stories about, are Wagner going to invade this country or this country? Oh, they're launching from Belarus. Where could they invade? They're not good. No, Russia. No one's going to invade a NATO country. None at all. This is why, really, we needed to have had Ukraine. I mean, we needed to have defended Ukraine properly in 2014 when it would have been easy. Would have been a simple, absolute piece of piss then. Because Putin wasn't sure he was testing the waters. So he didn't commit. It was very much like it was a false flag operation, really. with a small number of troops, and then no one did anything, so he sent more in. Occam's Rage, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. Yeah, indeed. I mean, there are such things as conspiracies, and some of those conspiracies can be elaborate. But again, literally every expert on this matter will say, look, Prigozhin is an idiot. Putin, mob boss mentality. Like Dmitry Gruzbinsky, for example, who's former diplomat, very clearly making the point today, or yesterday rather, last night. He was saying, look, you don't look for any subtlety. This act harms Russia's interests in Ukraine, right? It harms their interest in Africa, right? Doesn't matter to Putin. He was humiliated. He's acting like a mob boss. He's been disrespected. And he has to then stamp his authority, because he lives in a very cutthroat society where if you show signs of weakness, then you will be for the chop. So he has to make it, he has to make it so that if anyone's thinking of bringing him down, that they must succeed, must absolutely succeed. Otherwise they will die. That has to be how Putin gets people thinking. Who runs Wagner now then? Who knows? Who knows? No one. That's the thing. You've now got a load of troops everywhere. Russia, after the coup, Russia was trying to fold them into the regular army. But whether they, obviously the problem is that if you, as I say, Wagner were the only vaguely trained troops that Russia had available to them outside of Russia. There are trained troops in Russia as well to try and defend it. But in terms of their outland operations, like the regular troops in Ukraine, like they don't even know which end of a rifle to point, which is just as well because they've not really got any ammunition anyway. And they've certainly got no leadership. So you can imagine these Wagner troops, right? They're mercenaries. They're not soldiers. They're trained, but they're not soldiers. They're mercenaries. The coup was almost certainly caused because of the losses they took in Ukraine, in the meat grinder. I mean, they were used to being active in Africa, where they were really well equipped. They were against opposition that was not well equipped or well led. And, they had it was a bit like the days of the British Empire when, shall we invade Europe? No, they've got guns. Let's go and invade this land far away where they've got spears and we've got the guns. That's Wagner in Africa. They had the superior military equipment, the superior training, the superior logistics. So then they go to Ukraine, where none of that's true. They're now up against a modern military that has, some top of the range or even middle of the range Western military technology, better led, better motivated, and it's a meat grinder for them. Every they capture a town that had a pre-war population of about 70,000, and it cost them, not Wagner specifically, but them and the Russian forces, 100,000 casualties. So it's costing them more soldiers' lives, warriors' lives, than the population of the town they're capturing. That's not sustainable. So that, so then if you then tell these Wagner mercenaries to act under the direction of an incompetent military leader in a quagmire like Ukraine, yeah, I can imagine they're not going to be happy about that. I can absolutely see mutinies. Say the flight was from Moscow to Leningrad, was it? I thought it was from somewhere in Africa. Prigozhin's remains said to have been identified. Okay. I mean, we'll see what over the coming days we'll get more information, but it's I think it's very likely because Putin wanted him dead. What worries me is the EU, all its faults considered, stands against the chaos of disaster capitalism. Meanwhile, in the Russian regime seems to have great influence in them, and it's mini-me the UK. It's absolutely got its claws into the UK. It's well established. Even Parliament said as much. Parliament has released a paper saying as much. No one really knows how to deal with it. You know, people will ask me sometimes, you know, what will the... Because obviously we know the Labour government have got no interest in supporting Londongrad. But what to do about it? You know, there are economists saying Labour really need to deal with it. And it's like, well, yes, but can they? You know, I've said before, my worry is if you try and do it bit by bit behind the scenes, that's probably the best solution politically, but that could take longer. If you launch a full public inquiry and it all comes out, wouldn't that cause panic? Like in the financial markets, politically unsustainable. Labour cannot afford to do a Liz Truss. But there you go. Phil, lovely haircut, love it. It was trainee haircut. You know, I rang. It's been getting to. It always does this. It gets too long, and then I go, oh, like a few weeks ago, I thought, oh, I need your hair cutting, and then I said to my partner, I'll forget for like 3 weeks, and I did, because every time I remember I need my hair cutting, it's outside of the times I can ring to get my hair cut, and whenever it's the daytime, I'm working and I forget. So eventually, I rang and I said, oh, it was really irritating me, and I said, it's Monday actually. It was on Monday, and I thought, right. I'll try and get an appointment for the end of the week. And I rang up and the trainee was there and he's saying, well, I said, when have you got appointments? And he says, well, I've got some today, but if you want one of the hairdressers, it'll be next week. I'm not waiting until next week. You'll do. Cut my hair short, that's fine. And it was fine. It was fine. He obviously still got it looked over by the actual hairdresser before they let me loose. But it's okay. I'm happy. Being short is what I'm mostly interested in, because I don't like it when it gets even like a bit longish. It just irritates me. But anyway, right. Let's. Paul's just reminded us there. 502 viewing. Hit the like button. Only 46 so far. It's one little button. Click it. Click. Have I clicked it? I can't click it. I'll click it later. But there we go. Patrick saying most Wagner mercenaries wouldn't take the pay cut of being put into the Russian regular army. Well, that's the point. I mean, obviously, well, it's one of these things, isn't it? If you, mercenaries are mercenaries. They do it for the money. I mean, that's, you know, it's where the word comes from. But at the same time, it's like, do they have another option? Some of them may, because what's their option? They don't want death either. But then it's like, you know, if they're threatened with execution for desertion, if they're just co-opted into the regular Russian army, and it's like, right, if you desert, you're a deserter and we'll shoot you, and no one wants death, they'll rather take the lower pay. But at the same time, if they see Ukraine as a death trap anyway. Martin saying, Phil, when you're doing a live session, could I wear a stronger t-shirt as your mic hangs too far from my mouth and I'm very quiet? Unfortunately, the mic is... I'll show you. It's there. Hang on. If I grab it, there you can just about see it. So it's sort of right next to my head. The mic itself, unfortunately... No, there is another mic actually here to my right, which I was using. The thing is, this mic is actually really good for this sort of thing. It's designed specifically for doing like live streams in what is otherwise an ordinary room. Whereas the other mic I've got to my right is a better quality one for studios where you've got soundproofing and things. But unfortunately, it's not suitable in here, whereas this one is. But it is, unfortunately, and it's up the gain is the highest I can get it. Unfortunately, it is a bit quieter than the others, but most people are usually fine with it. But that is the reason for that, I'm afraid. The mic is right next to my head. If I put it any further, then the VCam would get confused. Been saying for years that Parliament needs root and branch overhaul sooner rather than later. Real sanctions for corruption. Yeah, again, I think the worry is that the problem is so bad that if you shine a public spotlight on it, the public lose all confidence. So that's the issue there, I'm afraid. Here in Asia, all the news is focused on the BRICS summit. Well, I mean, I worried that here, the reporting on Wagner is just, ooh, political assassination, how exciting. Instead of what this means. I mean, I tell you what, I'm not really seeing a lot of reporting. The Guardian always do a little bit of this, to be fair. What I'm not really seeing on like the BBC is, what does this mean for Europe? What does it mean for us? It's like most of the mainstream media are so focused on distraction news. Oh, something to distract from the Tory skip fire. We'll talk about that. How exciting. That they've forgotten that what they're supposed to do is make the news relevant to their viewers, right? And obviously the BBC is international and so on. So, but they need to be explaining not just the Prigozhin Putin drama, but what are the tendrils? Where's the extrapolation of this in terms of the impact on Europe and on Britain? And I'm not really seeing that. There is some of it in The Guardian. There was an article in The Guardian. The Guardian tend to be good at that sort of thing. They do that. But in the BBC, no, not seeing it. Not seeing it at all. But there we are. Oddly enough, the words mercenary and mercy share a common origin, meaning to reward. I've never considered that before. Yeah. I'm much quieter on live broadcasts than on recorded ones. Yes, that is because for my recorded ones, they're in my studio, unless I'm ill and have to do it here. They're in my studio where I do have a better quality microphone, but I also have some soundproofing, which is it's not a brilliant studio, but there's some soundproofing, and therefore I can use a proper microphone. Here, I'm afraid I cannot. But anyway, we've sort of run out of time there, I'm afraid. Thank you very much for coming on. We'll be, Graham will be back on tomorrow in the morning one, and then we may both be on in the afternoon again. That usually depends on whether he's available. I should be. Even though I've got a lot of work to do because my internet service provider has been messing me about. But don't forget to click the like button if you have not already, and subscribe to the channel to be notified of further content. And you could check out in the description below for details for joining Patreon if you'd like to support the channel further as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.